Forest Pines Hospital, a facility nestled deep within a vast national forest blanketed by thick snow, in the winter always carries a strange and eerie sense of stillness. Situated between dense pine trees and winding roads that are barely found on any map, this hospital feels like a place apart, isolated from the outside world. No one can deny the tranquility and solitude it exudes. But for many, Forest Pines harbors a strange history that they dare not speak of. For years, a particular room has become the subject of hushed whispers among the staff. This is room B214, a ward that doctors and nurses only mention in soft tones with undertones of concern. Most of the patients who are brought into this room do not survive, not because the medical staff didn't try, but for a reason that is hard to explain. Despite all the machines and efforts, the patients always seem to pass away. Room B214 is always unnervingly cold no matter how high the thermostat is set. The chill seeps into every corner of the room, an unnatural cold that refuses to leave, and it only becomes more unbearable on those cold winter nights. That winter, in the dreary and gloomy atmosphere of Forest Pines, a 7-year-old girl named Ava was brought into room B214. Ava had been battling a mysterious and undiagnosed illness for days. Her mother, Rachel, a middle-aged woman who had once been an elementary school teacher, could do nothing but sit by her daughter's bedside holding her hand and counting every weak breath that Ava took. Ava had lost all ability to respond to anything. She could no longer speak, open her eyes, or breathe any more deeply than her fragile breaths allowed. The doctors had said that Ava only had a few days left to live unless there was a miracle. But no one at the hospital believed that would happen. The doctors had discussed saying goodbye during their meetings with Rachel, but she remained silent, not crying, her only action being her steadfast care for her daughter, Forest Pines, a place steeped in strange stories for decades now, witnessed an impossible battle, a battle between the fragile life of Ava and the disease that no one could understand. In the stillness of the hospital, where only the hum of machines and the howling wind through the windows could be heard, Ava lay there like a ghost of herself, separated from everything, her frail body with barely a breath. However, on a particular winter night, as snow began to fall heavily and blanket everything outside, a strange event occurred. While Rachel sat by her daughter's bedside in the dim light, a shadow appeared at the end of the hospital hallway. It was a dark, low figure moving slowly as though it was being pulled toward this place by an invisible force. Rachel saw the figure, and she felt an odd sensation, a feeling that something strange was happening. This feeling was one of unease, but also an inexplicable urge that she could not explain. Orion, a German shepherd with a black and white coat, appeared from the darkness, carrying with it a special cold from the outside. Its body was soaked with melting snow, and bits of water from the snowflakes clung to its fur. The dog walked calmly down the hospital corridor, as though it were familiar with the place, as though it knew exactly where it needed to go. As it approached room B214, no one stopped it. The doctors and nurses couldn't say anything as it approached and stood in front of the room. The dog stared into the room as if it shared a special connection with the girl inside. Rachel, although initially confused and unsure of how to react, felt an unusual connection with the dog. It was as though this dog wasn't a stranger, but an old friend, a companion from the past that she had forgotten. 12 years ago, when she was a young girl, she had also raised a German shepherd named Toby, and remembering that image caused her heart to tighten. The dog in front of her seemed to have returned from the past, and it looked at her with eyes that were both sorrowful and resolute. With a small nod as if she understood, Rachel opened the door for Orion to enter the room. The dog walked in naturally without fear or hesitation. It climbed onto the bed and lay beside Ava. Remarkably, the dog made no noise. It simply lay next to Ava, gently placing one paw on her hand. Everything in the room seemed to become eerily peaceful, even though Ava still showed no sign of improvement. But then something miraculous happened. A small movement from Ava's fingers, and then a whisper. "You really came." The soul of Forest Pines Hospital was always shrouded in a heavy silence. The long, dark hallways, lit only by dim lights, all created an atmosphere of gloom that could not be described. Although the hospital staff had become accustomed to this quiet environment, there were certain rooms, certain places that even they avoided stepping into. One of these was room B214. For those who had ever crossed its threshold, the eerie stillness and the feeling of an invisible presence lurking in the air were undeniable. Here, Ava, a 7-year-old girl, was battling a deadly illness. She could not move, could not speak, and was growing weaker by the day. The doctors had informed her mother, Rachel, that Ava's condition was critical, and there was little hope left. The entire hospital had already prepared for the inevitable, the death of an innocent child. They could only watch, counting every faint breath she took, but nothing could be changed. Rachel, Ava's mother, felt as though her heart was being torn to pieces. She sat beside her daughter's bed all day with nothing but the steady hum of machines and the dim lights on the ceiling to keep her company. She had run out of patience to ask the doctors, run out of strength to cry. The physical and emotional exhaustion had drained her of all hope. Every time she saw her daughter lying still, unresponsive to anything, she felt like she was standing on the edge of despair. Ava's condition showed no signs of change. She still lay there, eyes tightly shut, motionless. Rachel continued to sit beside the bed, her eyes occasionally glancing out the window, where the snow fell quietly in the dark. Each moment felt heavy and stretched out like a journey with no destination. She knew that what she hoped for would never come, but she remained there, for she could not leave, could not walk away from her daughter. Only a few people in the hospital dared to visit room B214, as everyone believed all hope was lost. The nurses avoided entering unless absolutely necessary. The doctors also kept their distance, having grown accustomed to the grim outcomes this room consistently delivered. Every time they stepped in, a cold, silent feeling would wash over them, as though they were touching a secret they could never understand. But then, on a night when the snow was falling heavily and everything seemed to fall into darkness, something strange occurred. While Rachel sat by her daughter's bedside enduring the endless long nights, the hallway lights suddenly flickered. A shadowy figure appeared at the end of the corridor, faintly visible in the darkness. Rachel jolted upright, her eyes fixed on it. It was Orion, a wild German shepherd, stepped out from the snowstorm, its fur soaked with melting snow. The dog looked toward Rachel, its eyes bright as though holding a message, but she couldn't understand. It moved slowly, as though it already knew where it needed to go. No one stopped it, despite the hospital's strict policy forbidding pets in patient rooms. Yet with its presence, the dog seemed to exert an invisible force that pushed everyone out of its path. The once quiet hallway felt different as the dog passed through, its steps soft yet filled with a determination that no one could comprehend. Rachel couldn't take her eyes off it, and despite the rising anxiety in her chest, she felt an odd sense of connection, as if this dog wasn't a stranger but an old friend, a companion she had once known long ago. 12 years ago, when she was a young woman, she had raised a German shepherd named Toby, and the memory of that dog made her heart ache. The dog before her seemed to have returned from the past, and it looked at her with eyes that were both sorrowful and resolute. With a small nod, as if understanding, Rachel opened the door for Orion to enter. The dog entered naturally, without worry or fear. It walked over to the bed and lay down beside Ava. Remarkably, it made no sound. It simply lay beside Ava, gently placing one paw on her hand. Everything in the room seemed to become eerily peaceful, even though Ava still showed no sign of improvement. But then a miracle happened. A slight movement from Ava's fingers, and then a whisper, "You really came." Man, since that moment, something miraculous began to happen. Ava's vital signs, which had remained almost unchanged for days, began to stabilize. Her heart rate became more regular. Her oxygen levels increased, and the doctors began to notice changes they still couldn't explain. Rachel watched her daughter, unable to believe her eyes. It felt as though a miracle was unfolding before her. Everything in room B214 seemed to have come to a halt in time, a silence so profound that it felt as though the entire world had stopped turning. Ava still lay there on the white hospital bed, her body like a ghost that couldn't move, breathing steadily but weakly, her eyes tightly shut, with no reaction to the world around her. Rachel Ava's mother sat by her side, holding her daughter's hand tightly, her eyes never leaving Ava's small face. Deep inside, Rachel knew that only one miracle could save her daughter now. The entire Forest Pines Hospital, especially room B214, was enveloped in a strange, ominous atmosphere. Snow fell outside the window and the wind howled through the cracks in the window. But all of this seemed to amplify the cold in Rachel's heart. She felt the deepest loneliness and despair as she faced the inevitable loss of her daughter. The doctors had no hope left, and the nurses had quietly discussed preparing a small coffin for Ava. And Rachel was ready, although her heart was in pieces. She had accepted her daughter's death, or at least she had tried to convince herself that it was unavoidable. It was at this moment when Rachel thought she had let go of all hope that something strange happened. A shadow appeared at the end of the hospital corridor, faintly visible in the darkness of the night, with no sound, no noise. At first, Rachel thought it was just an illusion brought on by her solitude and exhaustion. But when the light from the hallway spilled into room B214, she saw a dog, a large German shepherd, its black and white fur covered in snow, walking steadily, as if the dog had a mission it couldn't miss. This dog was not a strange creature. Its eyes were bright, sharp as though it knew exactly what it needed to do. It was not worried, not scared. Under the dim hallway lights, Orion, a name Rachel seemed to have heard from somewhere, walked closer to the door of room B214. Despite the strict rules of the hospital which prohibited pets from entering patient rooms, no one stopped it. The dog passed through the staff as though some invisible force was pulling it toward this place. Rachel couldn't believe her eyes. She stood up suddenly, walking toward the door, her hands trembling, unable to stop looking at the dog. A strange feeling rose within her, a feeling she had never experienced before. This dog seemed like a ghost from her memories, a long-forgotten memory. 12 years ago, when she was a young woman, she had raised a German shepherd named Toby, and it had been her most loyal companion during her lonely years until it passed away. And now, standing before her was a dog identical to Toby, with the same bright eyes, the same black and white fur. It looked at her silently, but that look was full of meaning. With a strong, inexplicable feeling, Rachel opened the door, not knowing why she did so, but unable to stop herself. She knew that something had to happen in this room, and this dog might be an important part of it. Orion walked into the room, its firm paws making a light sound on the cold hospital floor. The dog didn't wander. It went straight to Ava's bed, showing no fear or sign of worry. Orion lay down beside Ava, gently placing one paw on her hand, and then, as if guided by an invisible force, Ava began to react. Her body, which had been as stiff as a statue, slowly began to show signs of change. The first sign was a slight movement from her hand, her slender fingers twitching slightly, a faint sign of life. Rachel held her breath, her heart stopping for a moment as she saw that movement. At that moment, the air in the room grew heavy, as if an invisible force was enveloping the space and everything around them seemed to stop. There was no noise, no movement from the world outside. Ava whispered with a weak breath, "You really came." That sentence felt like a miracle, a sign that life had not completely abandoned Ava. It was the moment when all hope, which had seemed to have faded, was suddenly rekindled. Everything in the room became unusual. The machines, which had been loud and cold, now seemed to soften, as if they too knew that a miracle was happening. And in that moment, Rachel realized that not everything was over. Though she couldn't explain it, she knew that Orion was not just an ordinary creature. It brought something greater, a powerful protection that only miraculous beings could offer. The dog did not move, did nothing more than lie next to Ava, but the look in Orion's eyes, its silence and determination, made Rachel feel a peace she had never felt before. It was as if everything had returned to its rightful place, as though every corner of the room had been illuminated by an invisible source of energy, a force that couldn't be seen but was very real. At that moment, Rachel knew that something greater than life and death was happening right before her eyes. But she no longer feared. She just needed to believe in something that couldn't be explained. And Ava, her daughter, was slowly waking from the deep slumber, not because of any conventional treatment, but because of a force she couldn't fully understand. Every moment in room B214 seemed to stretch on endlessly. The air in the room seemed to thicken, not only due to the biting cold of winter, but also because of the silence so heavy that it made everything feel as though it had come to a standstill, just waiting for something to happen. Ava still lay there motionless on the white hospital bed, her body like a ghost, unable to move, breathing steadily but weakly, her eyes tightly shut with no reaction to the world around her. Rachel, Ava's mother, sat beside the bed holding her daughter's hand tightly, her eyes never leaving Ava's small face. Deep inside, Rachel knew that only one miracle could save her daughter now. The entire Forest Pines Hospital, especially room B214, was enveloped in an eerie atmosphere. Snow fell outside the window and the wind howled through the cracks in the window. But all of this seemed to only add to the cold in Rachel's heart. She felt the deepest loneliness and despair as she faced the inevitable loss of her daughter. The doctors had lost hope. The nurses had quietly discussed preparing a small coffin for Ava, and Rachel was ready. Though her heart was broken, she had accepted her daughter's death, or at least she had tried to convince herself that it was unavoidable. It was at this moment, when Rachel thought she had let go of all hope, that something strange occurred. A shadow appeared at the end of the hospital corridor, faintly visible in the darkness of the night, without a sound, no noise. At first, Rachel thought it was just an illusion caused by her solitude and exhaustion. But when the light from the hallway spilled into room B214, she saw a dog, a large German shepherd, its black and white fur covered in snow, walking steadily as though this dog had a mission it couldn't miss. This dog was not a strange creature. Its eyes were bright, sharp, as though it knew exactly what it needed to do. It wasn't worried, wasn't afraid. Under the dim hallway lights, Orion, a name Rachel seemed to have heard from somewhere, walked closer to the door of room B214. Despite the hospital's strict rules prohibiting pets in patient rooms, no one stopped it. The dog passed through the staff as though some invisible force was pulling it toward this place. Rachel couldn't believe her eyes. She stood up suddenly, walking toward the door, her hands trembling, unable to stop looking at the dog. A strange feeling rose within her, a feeling she had never experienced before. This dog seemed like a ghost from her memories, a long-forgotten memory. 12 years ago, when she was a young woman, she had raised a German shepherd named Toby, and it had been her most loyal companion during her lonely years until it passed away. And now standing before her was a dog identical to Toby, with the same bright eyes, the same black and white fur. It looked at her silently, but that look was full of meaning, with a strong, inexplicable feeling. Rachel opened the door, not knowing why she did so, but unable to stop herself. She knew that something had to happen in this room, and this dog might be an important part of it. Orion walked into the room, its firm paws making a light sound on the cold hospital floor. The dog didn't wander. It went straight to Ava's bed, showing no fear or sign of worry. Orion lay down beside Ava, gently placing one paw on her hand, and then, as if guided by an invisible force, Ava began to react. Her body, which had been as stiff as a statue, slowly began to show signs of change. The first sign was a slight movement from her hand, her slender fingers twitching slightly, a faint sign of life. Rachel held her breath, her heart stopping for a moment as she saw that movement. At that moment, the air in the room grew heavy, as if an invisible force was enveloping the space, and everything around them seemed to stop. There was no noise, no movement from the world outside. Ava whispered with a weak breath, "You really came." That sentence felt like a miracle, a sign that life had not completely abandoned Ava. It was the moment when all hope, which had seemed to have faded, was suddenly rekindled. Everything in the room became unusual. The machines, which had been loud and cold, now seemed to soften, as if they too knew that a miracle was happening. And in that moment, Rachel realized that not everything was over, though she couldn't explain it. She knew that Orion was not just an ordinary creature. It brought something greater, a powerful protection that only miraculous beings could offer. The dog did not move, did nothing more than lie next to Ava, But the look in Orion's eyes, its silence and determination, made Rachel feel a peace she had never felt before. It was as if everything had returned to its rightful place, as though every corner of the room had been illuminated by an invisible source of energy, a force that couldn't be seen but was very real. At that moment, Rachel knew that something greater than life and death was happening right before her eyes. But she no longer feared. She just needed to believe in something that couldn't be explained. And Ava, her daughter, was slowly waking from the deep slumber, not because of any conventional treatment, but because of a force she couldn't fully understand. Room B214 now was no longer just a place of silence, but had turned into a battlefield between life and death, where everything was changing in silence. Ava still lay there on the white hospital bed, but this time something was different. The girl whom the doctors had almost given up on seemed to have shown her first reaction after many days of lying motionless. However, this miracle did not come easily. Every change came at a cost. Orion the Beast still lay beside Ava, not moving, but its presence was like a protector guarding Ava from a world that Rachel could not see. During the days before, when everything seemed to be reaching the point of despair, Rachel could not stop looking at the dog. She sensed something strange in the air. This was not an ordinary dog. This dog had a steadfastness and strength that she had never seen before. The lights in the room dimmed, but the dog remained patient and calm, like a guardian saint. Although it seemed that Ava still had not awoken at this moment, Rachel noticed a change in the atmosphere. First, the small fingers of the little girl began to move. Rachel couldn't believe her eyes, her heart pounding as she saw Ava's hand move slightly. Though very small, but clearly there was a change, a soft breath, like a whisper, just at a slight movement, but enough to rekindle a small spark of hope within her. Ava, with her dry, cracked lips, whispered, "You really came." Those words, though very soft, were like a miracle to Rachel. It was not just a sentence, but a confirmation that her daughter was still alive, that she had not completely given up, that there was still a flicker of light in this exhausted body. Rachel leaned down, looking into Ava's dim eyes, and knew that although everything was still unclear, something bigger was happening. Meanwhile, Orion still lay quietly beside Ava, making no sound, offering no other actions except for watching over the girl. But its presence, its endless patience gradually calmed the surging waves of fear in Rachel's heart. The dog was not panicked, was not showing any signs of worry, but simply was there like a loyal friend, like a silent warrior keeping watch. The dog did not move, but something strange began to happen. The wind outside the window grew stronger, howling through the cracks in the door, causing the thin curtain to flutter. The lights in the room began to fade and an unexpected chill rushed in. Rachel felt the change in the air, an unusual feeling as if the room was being controlled by some invisible force. The cold did not just come from outside, but from the room itself. Everything in the room seemed still, but there was a strange tension in the air. From the darkness, Orion's eyes glowed brightly. The feeling of worry gradually grew in Rachel's heart. She felt as though something was coming closer, something only Orion could sense. The dog stood up, its sharp eyes not leaving the dark corner of the room. It felt as if there was a presence, an invisible ghost lurking in the room trying to approach Ava. The dog, with absolute caution and focus, slowly moved toward the dark corner of the room, where the dim light could not reach Orion's gaze. Tense and full of determination, seemed to warn of something hidden there. Suddenly, room B214 became unbearably cold, not just because of the outside chill, but because of an unseen, threatening presence that had never been felt before. Rachel, her heart pounding, felt an invisible force that made it hard for her to breathe. Orion moved toward the dark corner, its body rigid, its limbs braced as if preparing to face a sudden attack. And then suddenly the lights in the room flickered. The beams of the lamps in the room seemed to be sucked into some invisible force. Everything in the room began to unravel. The lights flickered, the space tense, as if a taut string was about to snap. Meanwhile, Ava still lay motionless, but Rachel's heart felt as if it would break from the worry. Something was truly happening, and she knew that without Orion, without the protection of this dog, The girl would not make it through. Something in the darkness began to move invisible, but its presence was felt. Orion stood firm like a warrior protector, not stepping back. Just then a faint screech echoed in the air as if something had been broken, and the light in the room suddenly flared up. The cold seemed to dissipate and the air returned to normal. Ava, although still very weak, showed further signs of life. Her heart beat stronger, her skin warmed, and her little hand moved slightly. This was something Rachel could not believe. The miracle she thought would never come had arrived. Ava had returned piece by piece thanks to the inexplicable protection from Orion. Everything seemed to be over, but Rachel knew that a miracle had occurred, and Orion was the only protector that Ava needed. The dog not only protected the girl from the deadly illness, but also protected her from the invisible shadows no one could see. In room B214, where all hope had almost faded, a small light had appeared thanks to the persistence and courage of a dog, a silent protector. Room B214 was no longer just a place of heavy silence and despair, but had become a center of mystery where everything was changing. Orion, the German shepherd, still patiently lay beside Ava, but its presence not only brought a sense of calm, it had also become the only protector in a space where all rational explanations seemed meaningless. Rachel, Ava's mother, sat by the bed, gazing intently at her daughter, unable to take her eyes off her for even a second. As the days passed, Ava gradually showed miraculous signs of recovery, but this did not bring Rachel complete peace of mind. The feelings of anxiety and unease still clung to her, as if something was lurking, waiting. She could not explain why, but she sensed a strange change gradually taking shape in the air. Orion still lay beside Ava, but its eyes never left the dark corner of the room. Every night when the lights in the room flickered, Orion would wake, raise its head, ears erect, its posture tense, as if the dog could sense something that humans could not see. Rachel couldn't explain it, but she could feel the dog's concern and the fear it was trying to prevent. One night, as the snow outside began to fall more heavily, Ava remained asleep, but Orion did not sleep. The strange atmosphere still enveloped the room, as if room B214 was not just a place for healing, but also a space holding something invisible. An unfathomable force. Rachel could not fully comprehend the strange feeling inside her, but it was unmistakable. A sense that this room was no longer just a hospital room, but a place where an unexplainable battle was taking place. The cold in the room suddenly increased. Rachel felt the change immediately. Even though she had turned on the air conditioner, the room was still unbearably cold. A cold gust seemed to rush in from somewhere, causing her to shiver. Orion also began showing unusual signs. The dog stood up, its eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. It fixed its gaze on the dark corner of the room where the shadows seemed to thicken. Rachel could feel something was present there, though she could not see it. Orion with its tense ears, its body ready to face an invisible threat. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from the dark corner of the room. It wasn't the sound of something falling, but a different sound, a spectral sound, as if something was moving in the darkness just behind the wall. Rachel gasped, her eyes wide, staring at the darkness, unsure of what was waiting for her. The feeling of fear rose within her, uncontrollable, as if an invisible force was controlling the room. Orion suddenly growled, but not a bark, rather a low, powerful growl. That sound filled the room, strong, like a warning. Rachel stood up abruptly, her hands trembling, but unable to tear her eyes away from the dog. The tension in the air seemed to rise by the second. By now, she couldn't stand it any longer. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, but no one answered her. Only deadly silence remained. A cold gust of wind suddenly swept through the room. The window flung open, and the darkness in the room seemed to deepen. The lights in the room flickered again, then went completely out. Rachel could hear nothing but her own rapid breathing and the growing growl of Orion. She saw dim shapes moving in the darkness, as if there were invisible figures moving. Waiting for a chance to strike, Orion seemed unafraid. It stood in the middle of the room, its sharp eyes still fixed on the dark corner. Rachel felt a chilling and unsettling presence. The feeling of fear overtook her. Perhaps this was what she couldn't explain. Something was here, not illness, but a powerful force trying to attack Ava. Suddenly, the room became eerily silent. No sounds, only the steady breathing of Orion, as if the dog was waiting for some signal. Rachel couldn't comprehend it, but everything was happening right in front of her. Ava still lay motionless, but once again the strange feeling rose within Rachel, a feeling that someone was protecting Ava, and no one but Orion could do that. The darkness in the room grew thicker, as if it wanted to swallow both Ava and Orion. And then, just when it seemed like everything would be consumed by the darkness, a miracle happened. Orion suddenly lunged toward the dark corner of the room, charging with incredible strength, as if attacking something invisible. At that moment, everything in the room changed completely. The light flared back up, the air in the room seemed to be purified, and the strange cold disappeared. Rachel looked toward Ava. Ava still lay there, but this time the girl had a clear reaction. Her lips moved and a small, soft voice, but clear, came out, "Mom." That call was like a miracle, like a sigh of hope returning. In room B2214, which had once been a symbol of death and despair, now stood a place of life, a life that was strong, resilient, and unconquerable. In room B214, the air now seemed to thicken heavy, as though everything around them had stopped moving. Orion still lay beside Ava, but now the silence no longer felt peaceful. This German shepherd was no ordinary creature. It possessed a mysterious power and indomitable strength, but today it seemed more tense than ever. Orion's eyes never left the dark corner of the room, where the darkness was thick, as though hiding a danger no one could see. Rachel, Ava's mother, sat silently beside her daughter's bed, feeling the tension in the air. She had sensed this long ago. Something was wrong, some kind of threat lurking in the room, an invisible force she couldn't understand. Although Ava was gradually making a miraculous recovery, Rachel could not deny the growing unease inside her. Every time the lights in the room flickered, every time a cold gust blew in, she felt as though something was threatening her daughter. Orion stood up, its eyes never leaving the dark corner of the room. The dog slowly moved toward it, its ears tense, its body ready to face whatever was hiding in the shadows. Rachel stood up, following Orion, her heart pounding. The feelings of anxiety and fear overwhelmed her. She couldn't explain it, but she clearly felt that something was coming, and it wasn't good. Everything in room B214 grew increasingly tense. The lights in the room flickered as though they too couldn't endure the tension in the air. Rachel looked at Ava, her heart tightening. Her daughter still lay there, still very weak, but the strange reaction she had shown recently made Rachel feel a flicker of hope. Though that hope was fragile, Ava had begun moving more, and that made Rachel feel as if something miraculous was happening. But when she looked toward the dark corner of the room, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something terrifying was waiting for them. Orion stopped in front of the dark corner, its body stiff, its eyes glowing as if trying to pierce the shadows. The dog did not bark, did not show any signs of worry. It simply stood there like a warrior guarding something no one could see. Rachel stood still, not daring to breathe too heavily, afraid that any sound could make things worse. Though she didn't understand why the dog's silence made her feel a strange connection between it and the darkness in the room. Then something began to change. The light in the room suddenly flickered again, but this time the light did not go out completely. It became dim and seemed to be drawn into the darkness by some invisible force. The cold in the room quickly rose, making Rachel shiver. Orion stood firm, unmoving, but its tense eyes remained fixed on the darkness, as if the dog could hear something only it could recognize. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the dark corner of the room. It wasn't the sound of something falling or colliding, but a different sound, a ghostly sound, as if something was moving in the darkness just behind the wall. Rachel jumped, her heart seeming to stop. She couldn't see anything in the darkness, but the sound alone was enough to make her feel an invisible cold spreading through the space. Orion was not afraid. The dog growled, but it wasn't a bark. It was a deep, low growl, as if the dog was facing a great threat. It didn't bark loudly, but the low sound carried a powerful weight like a warning. Rachel couldn't understand this change, but she knew that something was approaching, and it certainly wasn't something pleasant. At this point, the lights in the room flickered more violently, and a cold gust blew through the window, making the curtain flap. The sense of unease in Rachel's heart surged violently. She felt she couldn't stay still, but she couldn't move, as if something invisible was holding her back. Orion did not move, and its eyes still locked on the dark corner of the room. Everything in the room seemed to freeze, and the only sounds were Rachel's frantic breathing and the low growl of Orion. Suddenly, the lights in the room went completely out, and the space was plunged into complete darkness. Rachel panicked, unable to see anything, but she felt a powerful presence in the room. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. Orion did not appear afraid. It just stood there, like a solid wall protecting Ava. The dog suddenly lunged toward the dark corner with unbelievable strength and courage. It didn't bark, didn't make a big scene. It just attacked the invisible presence with all its might. A sound echoed not from Orion or anything in the room, but from deep within, as if the entire space had been torn apart. Rachel was horrified, but she couldn't breathe anymore. Everything seemed to change instantly. Suddenly, room B214 lit up, the light pouring back into the space, and a strange calmness filled the room. The sense of worry in Rachel's heart gradually melted away, and she realized that Orion had won, had protected Ava. But deep inside, she could clearly sense that they still hadn't escaped some lingering threat. In room B214, the air seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Although Ava was gradually recovering, the strange changes in her made everyone feel uneasy. She no longer spoke much, and although her eyes could slowly open, they no longer held the gaze of a happy child. Instead, they seemed full of thought, as if she was seeing things others could not. She frequently stared at a dark corner in the room where the light could not reach, and her gaze was always filled with confusion, as if she was hearing a call no one else could hear. This strange sensation didn't only stop at her changing gaze. It extended to her actions as well. Rachel, Ava's mother, had noticed this change for some time, but she couldn't express it, couldn't put into words the uneasy feelings she had. Every night when everything grew quiet, Ava began to display strange reactions. She no longer slept as she had before, waking up in the middle of the night with her eyes wide open, staring not at anyone but just into the dark corner of the room. Rachel felt a chill every time she saw Ava like this. It felt as if her daughter was no longer just living in this world, but was also sensing something beyond human comprehension. During these moments, Orion the German Shepherd would get up, walk over to Ava, and lie down next to her, as if it knew something in the darkness was trying to approach her. The dog didn't bark, didn't panic, but the tension in its demeanor was something Rachel couldn't ignore. This dog was perhaps not just an ordinary creature. It was Ava's only protector in this moment. One night when the room was so quiet it only held the faint sounds of Ava's and Orion's breathing, something strange happened. Ava, with her thin lips, whispered something Rachel couldn't hear clearly, but it carried a strange feeling, as if the girl was communicating with an invisible force. Her words, though soft, felt like a call, like a connection between this world and another. The words seemed to carry a mystical power, causing the air in the room to shift. Rachel felt her body tense, her heart pounding in her chest, as if something had awakened in this room. The lights on the ceiling of room B214 suddenly flickered, then came back on. But this time the light was no longer pure, but had a different, dim, eerie color, as if the room itself was covered by a dark veil. The sense of unease grew in Rachel's heart. She looked at Ava, seeing that the girl's eyes were still locked on the dark corner of the room, and felt a profound change in her daughter. Something was happening, but she couldn't understand it. Why was Ava making such strange movements? Why was she staring at something that Rachel couldn't see? And why was there an inexplicable presence in this room? Orion didn't move. It remained still beside Ava, its eyes glowing brightly but without appearing worried. The dog just stared at the dark corner, then turned back to look at Rachel. A low growl rumbled from Orion's throat, but it wasn't a growl of anger. It was a growl full of vigilance, as if the dog was facing an invisible threat it couldn't touch. Rachel felt a cold sensation rising within her. This room was no longer a peaceful place. Something was in the darkness, an entity no one could see, but it was clearly lurking somewhere in this space. She couldn't take her eyes off Ava, and just then the girl whispered again. But this time Ava's words had a distinct change. This time her whisper wasn't as soft as before. She spoke with a tone full of confidence, as if giving an order to the darkness that was waiting. If I call its name, it won't dare come near. Those words were not just meaningless. They were a warning. Ava wasn't just speaking to an invisible force. Perhaps she was controlling it. Rachel felt frozen, her heart seeming to stop beating. Ava's words made the room fall into an eerie silence. The space felt compressed, as if something enormous was silently turning in the darkness. Orion suddenly stood up, its ears erect, and unlike any other time this time, the dog didn't move toward the dark corner, but stood still, staring directly at it. Rachel couldn't understand. Something was happening that she couldn't comprehend. Ava was no longer the weak, sick girl. She now seemed like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The look in her eyes directed at the darkness. Then she spoke in a commanding voice, clear and strong. "It's time." Orion suddenly barked loudly, not as if signaling to any creature, but as if confronting an invisible force that the dog knew would react. Once again, a cold gust swept into the room and the air seemed to become thick. Rachel felt she could not breathe. The room became too cramped, as though covered by an undeniable presence no one could explain. She looked back at Ava, then at Orion, and in that moment she understood something terrifying. Something was lurking in the shadows and only Ava and Orion could confront it. From then on, room B214 was no longer just a hospital room. It had become a place of life and death, where only courage, resilience, and an invisible strength could fight against the darkness Ava had become aware of. The darkness was no longer far away. It was right here in this room, and if Ava could face it, she would be the one to win. Since Orion had appeared beside Ava, all that Rachel had felt was a strange change in room B214. Although Ava was making a miraculous recovery, the presence of the dog was not only something mysterious, but also like an invisible bond, an essential part of the girl's life. Rachel couldn't explain it, but she clearly felt that this dog was not just an animal protecting Ava. It had a mission that Rachel couldn't understand. The invisible power that Orion brought made the air in the room feel heavy, as if something very important was about to be revealed. And then that moment finally came. One morning, as Rachel sat beside Ava reading a book to keep her occupied, a hospital staff member brought her an envelope. There was no sender's name, just a simple envelope inside of which was an old faded photograph. Despite the years, the photo was still clearly visible. Rachel frowned as she looked at the picture, for in it was a young girl about 7 or 8 years old standing next to a German Shepherd, the very same dog, Orion. But what was strange was that this photo was taken in 1952, more than 60 years ago. The girl in the photo had fair skin and long hair. But what struck Rachel the most was the girl's gaze. Despite being a child, her eyes held a resilience and a deep understanding that few could comprehend. And the German Shepherd standing beside her was no ordinary dog. The large dog radiated a powerful presence, a steadfast protector. And what was strange was that it had the exact same eyes as Orion, a piercing gaze as if looking straight into the soul of the one it faced. What was this photograph? And why was it sent to her? Rachel couldn't understand. Everything became even more mysterious when she noticed a faint, barely legible inscription on the back of the photograph. Still, she could make out one very clear sentence: "Thank you, Orion, for saving my child." The inscription was written by hand with a bold and strong handwriting. Below that, there was an old hospital address, which seemed to be the hospital where the photo had been taken. Forest Pines Hospital, the same place where Ava was being treated. A cold sensation spread through Rachel's body. The girl in the photograph, the dog in the photograph, everything seemed to point to an uncanny coincidence that no one could explain. She sat still, unsure of what to do with the photo, but the feeling inside her was unmistakable. Something had happened before, and now it was repeating itself. She had known that Orion was no ordinary dog, but the coincidence between the photograph and the present made her unable to ignore what was really happening in this room when Dr. Hale, the head doctor at the hospital, came to visit Ava that morning. Rachel could no longer contain her curiosity and concern. She decided to ask him about the strange photo she had just received. Dr. Hale was usually very composed, but when he saw the photo, he couldn't hide his surprise. He paused for a moment and then said, his voice calm and steady, "This is an old photo, and it's very important, Rachel. This isn't a coincidence. Every decade, at least one patient in room B214 is saved, and there is always a German shepherd like Orion that appears to protect them." Rachel listened, feeling as though she couldn't believe her ears. "But why Orion? Why does the same dog appear every decade?" Dr. Hale sighed, looking deeply into her eyes and said, "We can't explain it, but there's something strange that every doctor here knows. Room B214 has a very mysterious history. Every time there's a patient on the brink of death, a German shepherd, like the one we see here, appears and helps them. We can't explain this miracle, but each time the patient recovers and survives, it's not a coincidence, and it's not just Ava." Dr. Hale told Rachel about the past occurrences about the patients who had been saved in room B214, all of them marked by the appearance of a German shepherd. Each time the dog had no name, no clear history, but it always appeared at the right moment and stayed beside the patients who needed it most. And each time the dog appeared, the patient recovered and overcame even the most hopeless conditions. Rachel felt dizzy. So Orion is that dog. It has appeared before, and every time a patient survives. She asked, her voice filled with confusion. Dr. Hale nodded. "Yes, it appears at the right time, protecting those who need it. I can't explain why, but maybe it's a miracle we can't understand." Rachel looked back at the photograph in her hand, a sense of awe filling her heart. The girl in the photo, the dog Orion. Everything seemed to be part of something bigger. It had a deep connection to Ava. This dog was not just a silent protector, but perhaps a soul that had helped others before, now returning to save her daughter. Everything in room B214 held a profound meaning that she could not explain. But one thing was certain: Eva had been paid by Orion's protection, and Rachel, would not let her daughter face anything else but the protection of this dog. Deep inside, she felt that this wouldn't be the last time they faced challenges. The story of Orion still held some unanswered mysteries. But until then, Ava would be protected, and she would always believe in the miracle Orion brought. Since Orion appeared beside Ava, the girl's life had gradually changed in miraculous ways. The signs of recovery, although slow, were evident and began to emerge in her fragile body. Rachel watched her daughter every day, she unable to believe what was happening. As Ava, the girl the doctors had almost given up on, was gradually waking up and becoming healthier bit by bit. Those small steps, though simple, carried immense hope, a hope that Rachel herself had almost lost. But deep in her mind, Rachel knew that Ava's recovery was not just a coincidence, that there was some greater force protecting the girl. Orion was not just an ordinary animal, and Rachel was beginning to understand that every time she looked into Orion's bright eyes, she didn't just see a loyal dog, but a protective soul, a companion not from this world, but one that always appeared at the right moment to save young souls in danger. She couldn't explain why, but she felt that this dog was not a mere creature. It carried within it a mission, a purpose that only those who were steadfast and brave could comprehend. Every night when Ava slept, Orion lay close beside her, its eyes still never leaving the girl. Every time Rachel looked at the dog, she felt a sense of peace, a protection she had never felt from anyone. Not a human, but this dog. The very presence of it had protected Ava. And perhaps there was much more that Rachel still didn't fully understand about this dog. Orion never left Ava's side, never showed signs of fatigue, never asked for anything. But Rachel knew clearly that Orion was an indispensable part of her daughter's life. Though Ava had recovered, there were times when the girl became quiet, her eyes constantly looking toward the dark corner of the room, the same corner that Orion always paid attention to. It was as though in that gaze, Ava was communicating with some force that only she could see. Rachel dared not ask her daughter about these strange occurrences because she knew that perhaps Ava herself couldn't fully understand what was happening. However, one thing Rachel knew for sure, Ava was no longer the frail child she had once feared would not survive. The girl was stronger, more resilient, and most importantly, she had Orion, the inseparable protector. One morning when the warm sunlight streamed through the window, Rachel sat beside Ava's bed looking at her daughter. The girl no longer lay motionless. She sat up leaning against her pillow, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Rachel. Ava was able to speak, eat on her own, and most importantly, she no longer looked at the dark corner of the room with fearful eyes. Yet Rachel could feel that there was a change in Ava that she couldn't fully grasp. The girl was no longer the innocent child, but a soul that had gone through the life and death struggle, a soul that had been protected by a special friend. Orion was still by her side, never leaving Ava. Even though the girl had fully recovered, the dog showed no sign of fatigue or relaxation. Every step Orion took carried strength, as if it knew its mission was not yet complete. Rachel couldn't understand why, but she knew for sure that this dog was not just an ordinary pet. It was a timeless protector, a soul that protected children in need of help, even when no one else recognized it. One late afternoon when the sunset turned the sky red, Rachel and Ava stood by the window gazing outside. Orion stood beside them, its eyes still glowing, staring into the distance. Ava looked at the dog and whispered, "Thank you, Orion. Thank you for helping me survive." The words were soft but carried a deep gratitude, as if the girl understood that she had been saved by the sacrifice of a guardian spirit. And as the days passed, Rachel began to understand that Orion was not just an ordinary dog. It was a guardian spirit, a being that transcended time, appearing just when it was needed to protect young souls. Perhaps these souls were not only Ava's, but maybe other children throughout the history of Room B214 had also been protected by this very dog. Every time a child was about to leave this world, Orion would appear, protect them, and help them cross the threshold of life and death. And when its mission was complete, the dog would silently depart, disappearing into the darkness as though it had never existed. And now Ava was healthy, having overcome the trial. But Orion was still by her side, an inseparable part of her life. Rachel knew that even though Ava had recovered, this dog would never leave her daughter. Orion was not a pet. It was a guardian spirit, a silent companion, always by her side, ensuring that Ava would never face the darkness alone. Orion would always be there, not just as an animal, but as part of the miraculous story that Rachel could never explain. As the years passed and Ava grew up, Orion remained a loyal companion, not a living creature, but a timeless guardian spirit. The story of Orion was not just the story of a dog, but of love, protection, and unexplainable miracles. Rachel knew that Orion was not just a part of Ava's life, but a part of something greater, something that existed beyond time and space.